We have already seen in the previous video the concept of a catalyst. What do you mean by homogeneous and heterogeneous catalyst? What is the primary work of a catalyst? How it speeds the reaction? What do we mean by catalysis? And we have seen examples for homogeneous catalysts and heterogeneous catalysts, and we have already discussed the mechanism of heterogeneous catalysis with an example, and we've also discussed the differences between homogeneous and heterogeneous catalysis. So now we are going to continue with the portions. Those who have not seen the previous video, kindly go through that and then come to this video, then only you will understand the concept better. So catalysis, we were seeing, is the phenomenon of increasing the rate of the reaction with the help of a catalyst. So using a catalyst to make the reaction faster, that is what is meant by catalysis. Now, what are the general characteristics of a catalyst? You would have come across reactions which are catalyzed, okay, by different catalysts. If you see, you would have understood that the catalyst does not actually take part in the reaction. It stays just like that. No, you would have learned it like that so far. A catalyst will not take part in the reaction, but it will change the rate or the speed of a reaction. Okay, so that is essentially what the first point says. A catalyst is regenerated in a chemical reaction. So at the end of the reaction, you get back the catalyst. So, but we cannot say that the catalyst is not taking part in the reaction. What exactly happens is, the reactant will react with the catalyst and form a complex compound. This complex compound then degenerates to give you the product and the catalyst. Take an example of sulfur dioxide plus oxygen in the presence of NO2 as catalyst to give SO3. So the steps involved is, first SO2 reacts with NO2 and gives you SO3 and 2NO. Then 2NO combines with the oxygen to form 2NO2. If you combine these two reactions, you know how to combine two reactions. You have an NO2 on the left hand side and you have a 2NO2 on the right hand side. You have to cancel this. And 2NO on the right hand side of the first equation, 2NO on the left hand side of the second equation. So when you cancel it, you get back the original equation. So this just shows you that these two are steps involved in the first reaction. Okay, so what happens at the end? You get back the NO2 just like that. So what exactly happened was, the reactant has joined with the catalyst to form a complex compound. From this complex compound, once again we are able to regenerate the catalyst. So what does the catalyst do? The catalyst increases the rate of the forward as well as the backward reaction at the same time. So how much it speeds up the forward reaction, with the same speed it will speeden up the reverse reaction also. And the catalyst, you must remember this point, it is very important, it will not shift the equilibrium point. So at which point equilibrium was reached before the catalyst was used, that same point will be there even when you use a catalyst. But this equilibrium point will be reached faster. Okay, that is what the catalyst does. A very small amount of the catalyst is enough to increase the rate of a reaction to a considerable extent. So you can take the example there, H2O2. In the presence of platinum, you're getting H2O and oxygen. Okay, how much of the catalyst actually we are using? Only 10 power minus 8 moles per decimeter cube of the catalyst platinum is required. That is a very small amount. Take the process of digestion in our body. We have enzymes in our body which catalyze digestion. Under certain conditions, if you have one molecule of enzyme, it can catalyze up to 5 million molecules in 1 minute. So what I'm trying to tell you is, a very small amount of the catalyst is required. That's all. This itself will cause such a great increase in the rate of a reaction. A catalyst provides an alternate path which has lower activation energy for the reaction to proceed. If you take any reaction, okay, for the reaction to occur, you have to have some amount of energy which is called as activation energy. There is a minimum energy which is needed so that you can cross the energy barrier. You can see the diagram in this page. See, there are two curves given. The curve with the smaller bump on top, no, that highest point, is the activation energy required for a catalyzed reaction. The other one with the bigger height is the activation energy of uncatalyzed reaction. So what this catalyst does is, it aids in the changing from reactants to products, okay, but with less activation energy. So without a catalyst, suppose you take the first example given, H2O2 gives H2O and half oxygen with 76 kilojoule moles. But H2O2 aqueous, if you have I minus catalyst, how much of energy is needed? Only 57 kilojoules per mole, okay. Next, catalyst will not affect the energy of the reactants and products. Reactants as such, they will have some energy, the product will have some energy, okay. The catalyst will not affect those energies in any way. In general, if you take, a catalyst will only make a reaction faster. It will enhance the speed of a reaction. But normally it never initiates a reaction. But there are some exceptions. This hydrogen and oxygen, when you leave it just like that, even for 25 degrees for years together, they may remain without any reaction. But if you put a small platinum in that, if you use platinum wire to that mixture, it will start reacting immediately. So there are some exceptions, but in general a catalyst will only enhance the speed of a reaction. It will not initiate it. In catalysis, this is a very important subtopic, enzyme catalysis. What do you mean by enzyme catalysis? When the catalyst is an enzyme, we say it is enzyme catalysis. What are enzymes? Enzymes, biological catalysts. You would have heard, no? We have some enzymes in our body, and there are some enzymes which help in digestion. They are digestive enzymes. There are so many enzymes in our body, okay. Mainly you would have learned when you're doing digestion what is the work of the enzymes in our body. So if the catalyst is an enzyme, okay, and a catalyst is an enzyme, this catalysis by enzymes is called as biochemical catalysis. So we have so many biochemical reactions happening in our body, and these enzyme catalysts will speed in the rate of those biochemical reactions. If we don't have digestive enzymes in our body, the food that we may eat may take years to digest. But how fast our food is getting digested, isn't it? So just see how much the work of digestive enzymes is there in our body. So without catalysts, that reaction is going to take a very, very long time. If you eat today, you need not eat for next 6 months. But there are problems in that, isn't it? Right. So enzymes are specific in action. Certain enzymes, digestive enzymes, will act only in the digestive system, okay. So enzymes are specific. If they are in one region, they will act only for that region. They will not work in other parts of the region. For example, you can take the easiest one. Digestive enzymes will aid in digestion only. Then if you see, enzymes are actually complex nitrogenous organic compounds which are produced by plants and animals, and they are protein molecules. They have a high molecular mass, and in water they form colloidal solutions. What is colloidal solutions? We will come to that portion in the next 1 or 2 slides, okay. So what do you mean by colloidal solutions? Here you can see we have some examples of enzyme catalyzed reactions. Inversion of cane sugar, definitely that's a very, very important reaction. How cane sugar is converted to glucose and fructose in the presence of the enzyme called invertase. Next is the conversion of glucose to ethanol in the presence of the enzyme called zymase. Then you have hydrolysis of urea in the presence of the enzyme called urease to give ammonia and carbon dioxide. Maltose gets converted into glucose with the help of the enzyme maltase. Even conversion of milk into curd is brought about by an enzyme called lactobacillus enzyme, which is present in curd. Okay, so these are all very important examples of enzyme catalyzed reactions. We saw what are enzymes, how we have some reactions which are catalyzed by enzymes and they are called as enzyme catalysis reactions. Then we have seen some examples of enzyme catalyzed reactions. Now we'll go to general properties of enzymes. Okay. Enzymes as catalysts, they are very efficient. So the rate of a reaction can be increased from 10 power 8 to 10 power 20 times. Just imagine that, okay? So a reaction will happen 10 power 8 to 10 power 20 times faster. Then specificity. They catalyzed only one specific reaction. They will not serve as catalysts for different reactions other than some specific reactions. An enzyme is needed in a very small amount. Okay, we don't have to use a lot of enzyme. So enzymes are needed only in small quantities, and the best part is they are regenerated. If you see fuel, you have to go and fill the fuel, isn't it? You have to see that you top up those things. But enzymes can be regenerated under normal conditions. Okay. In general, the enzyme's action will be peak at an optimum temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, and when the pH is 7.4. You know what is pH? pH gives you the hydrogen ion concentration, isn't it? So if that is 7.4, that will be where the enzyme will act at the most efficient pH and temperature 37 degrees Celsius. Okay, fine. We have seen how the properties of enzymes are. Now we have to see what is the mechanism. How do these enzymes actually do the catalysis? On the enzymes, you can see there will be some cavities, okay, something like hole cavity means, will be present, okay, they will be of specific shape. And what will be in these cavities? You may have active groups like the NH2, COOH, SH, OH groups. These and all will act as active centers. And the substrate molecules means on which the catalyst has to act. Those will have a complementary shape that will fit into these cavities. You can think of this as a lock and key. Okay, you have many locks of a particular company. But if you take any key, will it fit into the lock? No. A specific key, there is a specific number for that key. That the grooves in the key and the grooves in the lock, they have a mechanism in such a way that this will fit in exactly. Okay, so that when you turn it, it will open, isn't it? It is just like that. The catalysts are specific, isn't it? So they have a specific shape with active groups there, and the substrate molecules will be like the key. They can just fit into these. Okay, they will bind it, and as I told you before, the enzyme will combine with the substrate to form an activated complex, and the activated complex will further give the product and will regenerate the enzyme. So that is the main mechanism involved in enzyme catalysis. If you see step 1, binding of the enzyme to the substrate to form an activated complex. So E is the enzyme plus substrate gives you ES, which is an activated complex. In the second step, the activated complex decomposes to give you the product and it regenerates the enzyme. So what does the catalyst do? The catalyst increases the rate of the forward as well as the backward reaction at the same time. So how much it speeds up the forward reaction, with the same speed it will speeden up the reverse reaction also. And the catalyst, you must remember this point, it is very important. It will not shift the equilibrium point. So at which point equilibrium was reached before the catalyst was used, that same point will be there even when you use a catalyst. But now the process of catalysis we have almost completed. We'll go to the next topic, colloids. So we are going to understand what is the meaning of a colloid, what are its types, and where we have application for these colloids. What do you see in the picture here? There is a beaker. In that water is there. You're putting sodium chloride, NaCl, in that. The sodium chloride is like the solute and water is like a solvent. Okay, you can dissolve it. When you mix salt in water, salt is fully soluble in water and you get a homogeneous solution. Homogeneous solution means from whichever part you take one drop and maybe you can drink it and see the taste will be the same. Okay, the properties are the same. And how much ever you search, no, you will never be able to find out. Even with a microscope, you will not be able to see the particles of salt separate from the solvent, even with a microscope, because the particle size will be 0.1 nanometers to 1 nanometer. 1 nanometer means it's 10 to the power of minus 9 meters. So how small it will be, isn't it? So even with a microscope, we will not be able to see those particles. Okay, so this is not a colloid, this is a true solution. Okay, it is homogeneous and you're not even able to make out the particles separately. In the second picture, what you have is, there is a solvent, water. You're putting sand into the solvent. What happens when you mix sand with water? If it is stirred, okay, the sand and water mixture will be there and you will be able to see the sand separately and the water separately, sand particles, isn't it? But if you allow it, it will settle at the bottom after some time. But again, if you stir it, you will be able to get a mixture which is not homogeneous. It is not homogeneous, it is not uniform throughout, right? As I was telling you, when sand is mixed with water, it will settle down at the bottom. What you get is called a suspension. But if you stir it, you will get a heterogeneous mixture. Now here, the particle size will be more than 10 cube nanometer. Alright, and you can see it with your eye. You can see the particles. So that is also not a colloid. What you have is a suspension. The first one is called as a true solution. The second one is a suspension. Now you consider the case where you have a beaker of water and you're putting starch inside it. Okay, something like a glue-like substance will be formed. That is a colloid, or we also call it as a dispersion. This colloid or dispersion is in between a true solution and a suspension. It is not a true solution, it's not a suspension. Intermediate in the sense that I am talking about the particle size. Okay, the particle size will be between 1 nanometer to 10 cube nanometers. Okay, so you get a colloid. So here we have an idea of mixtures. Mixtures can be homogeneous or heterogeneous. Homogeneous mixture means you get true solutions. Heterogeneous means it can be a colloidal dispersion, or you can call it a suspension. So there are two things. Okay, colloid or colloidal dispersion or dispersion is the starch in water. Suspension is sand in water, example. True solution means salt in water. Okay. Now, if you take a colloidal dispersion, there are two phases in it. Okay, one is like the solute. It's a discontinuous phase. So we call that as a dispersed phase, which is like the solute. Another one is the solvent. It is a continuous phase and we call it as dispersion medium. Please remember these things is very important. Okay, so you have a discontinuous phase and a continuous phase. The discontinuous phase you can compare it to a solute, and the continuous phase you can compare it to a solvent. So what is the name of that part which is discontinuous? Dispersed phase. And the part which is continuous, we say it is the dispersion medium. So when do we say a substance is in colloidal state? The particle size of that substance should be between 1 nanometer and 10 cube nanometer when you treat it with a solvent. Then what you get is said to be a colloidal substance. Here we have in a tabulated form the differences between the different types of solution: true solution, colloidal dispersion and suspension. Okay, the different types of mixtures we have, isn't it? I already told you. Now we are seeing the differences. What are the differences? A true solution is homogeneous. A colloidal dispersion and suspension both will be heterogeneous. Okay, they won't be same throughout. In a true solution, particles will be ions, molecules. Okay, NaCl you put in water, what will you get? Na plus and Cl minus, ions, isn't it? But in a colloidal dispersion, you will get macromolecules. Macromolecules are what molecules? Big molecules. Okay, it can be one big molecules, or it can be aggregate, means joining together of smaller molecules or atoms. So many smaller molecules or atoms can join together, or it can be macromolecules, big ones. In suspension also it is the same case. You have an aggregate of molecules or atoms. If you take a true solution, the particle size of the particles present in the true solutions will be between 0.1 nanometer and 1 nanometer. For colloidal it will be from 1 nanometer to 10 cube nanometer. But if you take a suspension, it will be greater than 10 cube nanometer. So the biggest one is going to be the suspension, and colloidal is in between both. If you take a true solution, particles will not settle at the bottom. In the colloidal also they will not settle. Okay, remember that in the colloidal dispersion also particles do not settle to the bottom. But in a suspension, the particles will settle at the bottom. If you take a microscope and view particles of a true solution, you cannot see, it will be invisible. If you take colloidal, even in colloidal dispersion, you will not be able to see the particles. But a suspension, you can see the particles definitely with a microscope. Sometimes with the naked eye itself, you will be able to see. Parchment paper is like a semi-permeable membrane, okay? So particles will pass through parchment paper. That means nothing will be left in that paper, that parchment paper. When you pour it, suppose you have a filter, okay? You have a cone-shaped filter. Okay, something like a funnel. You put a parchment in that and you pour a true solution. Nothing will be left on the parchment. But if you pour a colloidal solution, the particles will pass through, but it will pass through very, very slowly. But in a suspension, it will not pass through. Those big particles will be left behind. So these are the different types of mixtures we can see. So here we have the types of colloids. Okay, that is the types of colloids that can be formed based on the dispersed phase and the dispersion medium. So if your dispersed phase is solid, you can have the dispersion medium solid, liquid or gas. If the dispersed phase is liquid, the dispersion medium can be solid, liquid or gas. If the dispersed phase is gas, the dispersion medium can be only solid and liquid. You cannot have gas as a dispersion medium with the dispersed phase is gas. Why is that? You know that a gas and a gas, when it combines, due to the property called diffusion, isn't it? Diffusion is a very important property in gases. Yeah, so two gases combine means you will never get a heterogeneous mixture. Only a homogeneous mixture will come. Okay, so it is not possible for a gas to join with a gas and form a colloidal solution. Okay, so you must remember that. Okay, so based on the dispersion phase and the dispersion medium, you can say these are the types of colloids. Try to recall. Dispersed phase means, I told you, you can think of it like the solute, and the dispersion medium can be thought of like the solvent. Okay, so the second column here is, you can think of it as a solvent. So here, if a solid and solid phase and solid medium, okay, join together, the type of colloid you get is a solid solution. Sorry, that should be solid sol. Okay, solid sol. Liquid, solid liquid will give you a sol. Solid gas will give you aerosol. Liquid solid will give you gel. Liquid and liquid will give you emulsion. Liquid gas will give you aerosol. So gas solid, solid foam, gas liquid, foam. Okay, near you can see some examples for a solid sol. Ruby glass is solid sol. For a sol you can take paints. Aerosol, smoke is aerosol. Gel, you can take jellies as an example. Milk is an emulsion. Fog is an aerosol. Solid foam, you can think of that as pumice stone, isn't it? You have pumice stone. Have you seen a pumice stone? It will be white in color, full of pores, isn't it? It will be having pores in it. You would have seen it somewhere. Foam, you know what is foam, isn't it? So foam, whipped cream, froth, all that can be taken as foam. What do we have here? Now, colloidal solutions are named depending on the nature of the dispersion medium. If water is the dispersion medium, we say it's an aquasol or a hydrosol. If alcohol is the dispersion medium, we say alkosol. If benzene is the dispersion medium, we say benzosol. If gas is the dispersion medium, we say aerosol. Okay, so based on the dispersion medium, you can name the colloidal solutions. So for the next classification of colloidal solutions, please have a look at the next video.